Well, hello, everybody. It's Phil Gigliotti here again, and this is Messianic Lamb Network, and this program is One in Messiah. And in case you haven't tuned in before, it's a ministry where we connect readings from the Tanakh, the Old Testament, and the Brit Hadashah, the New Testament, and it's based around the scripture from Ephesians 2:14 and 15, that Yeshua in his own flesh broke down the partition between the two, making one new man. And of course, he also says in John chapter 5:39 that all the scriptures testify of him. All the scrolls are about him. And I do a live version of One in Messiah every Friday night at about 6:15 p.m. It's more like 6:30 p.m. And we meet at 709 Brook Park Road. If you're in the Cleveland area, it's 709 Brook Park Road, which is in Brooklyn Heights. It's at Calvary Chapel of Cleveland Church. And we do some praise and worship and a teaching and prayer time and so forth. And so if you're in the area and you wanted to pop in, that would be great. But today we're going to have a little different show. It's going to be, I think, more fun. And you'll be relieved to know that I'm not going to drone on a 57-minute teaching with my usual PowerPoints and things. I'm going to have a special guest, and we're going to talk about a book that she wrote. We're going to talk about some awards that came from this book. And her and I have been friends for a while, and we share a lot of interest, but in particular, we share an interest in just loving the book of Hebrews. And we both teach Hebrews as much as we can, and she has a whole podcast and Facebook site, and I don't know what else to call all the things, based around the book of Hebrews. And we both teach at the Basora Institute, which is also here in the Cleveland area. And we just love doing that sort of thing. So I'm going to bring on my friend Stephanie Pavlantos. Hi, Stephanie.
Hi. Thanks for having me today.
Oh, yeah, it's my pleasure. This will be fun.
Mm-hmm.
We had a couple of weeks ago, her and I did one session of the Hebrews class I'm teaching now, and it was so much fun.
Yes.
And she even drove an hour to get there.
It was worth it. It was fun, and you had a great class.
Yeah. So welcome to the program.
Thank you. I appreciate
I tried
it.
to say program instead of show because that sounds so tacky, but I always want to say show. Welcome to the show.
I know.
But welcome to the program. And I really want to talk about the book that you put together, that you wrote, and I guess some other people contributed to as well, and the awards that came as a result of that book. And not to mention, Stephanie is an author. She's published how many books? Quite a few books.
No, about 3.
3. Well, that's quite a few. She's published books, and she's a teacher. And as I said, so why don't you tell us a little bit about that project that led to that book?
So I am a Bible study teacher. I felt like the Lord called me to teach. But when I gave birth to my twins, it was a rough pregnancy and it was a rough birth, and they were premature. And so what happened was my son had, we didn't know until he was almost 2, but that he wasn't walking, he wasn't doing any of the developmental things, meeting those developmental markers. And when we took him to an orthopedic surgeon, pediatric orthopedic surgeon, and that doctor knew exactly what was wrong with our son, but he didn't tell us right away. He went in and took some x-rays and different things. And he came out and basically told us, your son has cerebral palsy. It's not a type of thing that will progress and get worse. He is as bad as he's going to get. But you can, through therapy and things, you can help him get better and get stronger. And so anybody who doesn't know what cerebral or cerebral palsy is, for him, he had a brain bleed, after he was born, and it damaged part of his hypothalamus. And, so what happens are his muscles became very stiff, and it's almost like the brain keeps firing for the muscles to contract, and it doesn't stop firing. Now, there's nothing wrong with his hands except he has a lot of fine motor control, but a lot of times you'll see people with their fists kept in their hands and fists, or their fingers are kind of awkward and they don't move, or their legs. So our son had both vision problems because it also affects the muscles in the eye, which would then pull one eye off to the side. So they call it lazy eye, and there's also some more technical words. But he had what they call ROP, which is rhinoplasty of prematurity, and his retinas became detached, and he lost part of his vision. But then he also had a lot of large muscle loss. So where he couldn't control those muscles, his legs were very stiff, and he was having trouble walking and crawling. So many years of homeschooling for me, because when I first signed him up for kindergarten, I realized that they didn't have the facilities they needed to help him. And it was going to be a private school, so it wasn't public. But so we just had some problems, and then he had to have surgery. So anyway, long story short, I brought him home, started homeschooling him. It was a rough, first 12 years. He had a lot of surgeries, he had a lot of difficulties, and it was probably harder on me than it was on him, because taking your son back and forth to the doctor, a surgeon, whatever, whomever, or just constantly watching him get either blood drawn or surgeries, or being in pain one way or the other. It was
Children tolerate things so
They
well
do.
compared to
It's mom and dad who had the trouble,
oh, absolutely. I mean, when I was going through my medical training, I knew on day one I didn't want to go into pediatrics, and like day one,
Yeah.
because there I was at Rainbow Babies and Children and saw
Mhm.
this ward of really sick children and the parents just
Mhm.
looking, and I said, I don't want to do this.
Yeah, it's hard, and then they were in the NICU for 10 weeks, and
Wow.
so once they were born, because they were so premature,
Wow.
and, so, from the time that they were, actually from the time I got pregnant with them, it was just a challenge. And, so it was kind of like that part of my life was just, it was my life. But as Matthew grew up and got more independent. Now Matthew is very he can walk. He has a little bit of gait. He uses a cane. He is considered legally blind. He cannot drive a car.
How old is he now?
He'll be 27 next month.
Oh.
So there were just like so many things that were part of that, even throughout high school and college, and that, they didn't just go away. The problems didn't go away. We had to find buses and things to get him, because he was showing up late to his classes and trying to walk, and finally we just had to say, okay, this isn't working. And he was going locally, so it was like having to just go in and constantly be an advocate for your child and say, this isn't good enough. He needs a way to get back and forth between his classes. He needs something. He cannot get to his classes on time. He cannot do this. And so they were good. They got a bus system set up, or they had a bus system, so they just included him on the route, and they took him and dropped him off at each of his classes and picked him up and took him to the next one. So it was all good, but you don't know these things are even available until you start really looking at them. But I tell you all this because a couple of years ago, probably actually starting in 2020, since we were home, we were, not going anywhere. I started doing a little bit more podcasts. I started, and it was like the Lord just opened the door for me to start talking about being a mom of special needs son. And it was hard at first because there were all these emotions, and there still are, but there were all these emotions that would just surface as I would talk about it. And I would get all like teary eyed, and just, it would just like flow out of me because I hadn't talked about it that much. And it was just, I never even called myself a special needs mom. I was just
Mhm.
a mom who had a son that had cerebral palsy and needed extra care,
Now his
needed.
twin was okay?
Yeah, now Alexandria, his it was Matthew and Alexandria. Um, well, what we didn't know is she is fine, but because they were on so much medication to keep them alive and to help them breathe, because they were on ventilators for 30 days, which
Wow.
is the maximum, as you
Wow.
know.
Yeah.
Um, and
Wow.
then they both came home. Alexandria came home on oxygen, and they both came home on monitors. So, Alexandria, due to all the drugs in her system, what we didn't know is that it affected their growth. So, they were both very tiny. Like,
Mm.
to give you an idea, at 15 months, almost a year and a half, they were 15 pounds.
Mm.
So they were very tiny in weight and stature. And so, um, excuse me. So Alexandria, being a girl, she kind of shot up before the boys did, because we also have a younger son, and she was taller, bigger than they were for a little while. Excuse me. Let me take a sip here. Um, but once she hit about 13, she was only about 4'10". Um, and we noticed that, the doctors, and then that it was probably 12 or 13, but at 12 they noticed Matthew was very small for his age. Matthew started having seizures, he started having other problems that started creeping up that we were unaware of. And so the seizures started, we took him to a neurologist, but the Lord healed him. I mean, we went up one day to the altar, we asked the pastor if, this is the diagnosis. We want, you know, we want healing. Oh, sorry. But we wanted our son to be healed. And so we went up, and the Lord just spoke to me so clearly and said, I'm going to heal him. He won't have seizures anymore. He'll have other problems, but he won't have the seizures. And that was the last time he ever had a seizure. And
Wow.
but we had been going to a neurologist, and he goes, your son's very small for his age. I'm afraid that he needs to see an endocrinologist and for about his hormones, his endocrine system. And so we found out that he um, didn't have enough growth hormone. And then we found out that Alexandria didn't either, because they went ahead and tested her. So Alexandria was too late as a girl to have anything done, because they x-ray your hand.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when they x-ray your hand, I guess the hands, if I'm correct, but it's one of the last things for the growth plates. They
Yes.
look like they have 3 bones. We have 1
Yes.
because they fuse, but a
Right.
child has 3 bones in each finger. So those, before they fuse, they can tell. So hers had already started fusing, which meant it was too late to give her the growth hormone. But because Matthew was behind her, we had to do a year of growth hormone, which are shots. So now it was like one more thing, having to start all these shots. So it was just such an emotional time for me, watching him have to go through all these different things. And so when I had the opportunity to talk about it, then it was in a very emotional, it was kind of like a healing type of
Mhm.
thing for me. And in one of those shows that I was doing, a woman was watching who came on, and it was kind of like this where you could leave comments. And but it was, he had shared it to Facebook. So she saw it on Facebook, and she started putting some comments down. and her name is Star Ayers. And Star was like, "Oh my goodness, I was glued to this because this has been my life." She goes, "I have a child with Down syndrome." And at that time, her child was quite a bit older than my son, but she had lived, you know, 40 some years with this daughter, and with all her difficulties. And so we really connected, and we just like literally got on the phone that night and talked until 11:30 in at night, just talking about our lives and our life with a special needs child. And so the host of the show joined in on the Facebook conversation and say, "Hey, this sounds like a great book."
Mm.
And we're like, "Oh," and after I had started doing the podcasts and different opportunities I had to talk about it, I felt I actually in my journal in some of my notes I had written down special needs devotions.
Mm.
And then here she was like, we do need to write down our stories, and we need to include other people like us who have also gone through the same hardships and difficulties, and but how we came out on the other side of it, and our children are well loved, and they're functioning in society. They're doing, or not. I mean, in some cases those children will never leave their homes, and that's a scary thought. Star shared with me, she goes, Star's a little older than me, and she started sharing. She's like, "Yeah, my husband and I often thought, our daughter is unable to take care of herself. What do we do? We're in our 70s. What do we do?" And so what happens when one of us get sick or one of us die and we can't take care of her anymore? And so they found a group home that was 20 minutes from their door that their daughter could live in for the
Mm.
rest of her life, and she would be taken care of. And so it was just that whole story, that meeting her and talking and comparing notes and talking about our own stories, basically started the book. We called it Room at the Table: Encouraging Stories from Special Needs Families. So
Wow.
we included moms and dads. We had one man who actually wrote his wife's story because he was the writer of the family. So he wrote his wife's story about living with her special needs brother. We had a woman who wrote about her special needs mom. Another
Mm.
family who wrote about not only their special needs daughter, but their marriage and how hard it was
Mm.
on their marriage at one point in their lives. And it is. It can be a reason for families falling apart and divorce. Um, we had a couple of therapists who joined in and wrote their stories. And then we had special needs adults that wrote their stories. And my son wrote the forward.
Oh, wow.
And so because he was always worried about, like, how am I going to function in life? What am I going to do? And am I ever going to be useful in society?
Wow.
Which he totally is. Um, our son Matthew speaks Arabic.
Wow.
He has traveled. He has gone to Israel. He has gone to Egypt. Um,
Wow.
and by himself, but or with groups. I mean, we don't even go with him. He has lived. He did a short um, internship in Washington D.C. That was hard because I felt like I was feeding him to the lions, you know? And, there were times that he would call me and say, "Mom, I can't find the metro," because he really, his eyesight is bad, and he was like, "I can't find the metro," and he would send his, Google Maps to me, and I
Oh.
could follow along with where he was, and then I could lead him, like, "You need to go straight, go to that stop sign or stop light, and now you turn here." And there were some good Samaritans along the way. There was a homeless man that said to him, you know, "Are you lost?" or something,
No.
and he walked him to the metro and then got a security guard to help him get on the train.
Oh,
So the
wow.
Lord would put people in his life to help him navigate, um, but just the things we all had our stories, and when Star and I stopped and just we actually she lives in North Carolina and I live obviously in Ohio. So I drove down in 2021, I think. Yeah. So 2021 or 20, yeah. So we actually, yeah, so one of those. It was just before. So we spent around Easter time. We were actually um together writing our book,
Mm.
putting the final touches on things and bringing it together and reading the stories that we had collected to each other as we kind of went through and edited them a little bit, and just crying as we read the stories because
Yeah.
everyone has a story, and sometimes these stories are just heartbreaking, and other times you're crying just because it's like it's so amazing how God intervened, you
Mhm.
know, and
I want you to tell everyone how you got the title for the book. I love this. When you wrote it when I saw it online, I thought, wow, that is so cool.
so we went with the story about room at the table because when David wanted to honor Saul's family and basically Jonathan's family, and he found out that Jonathan still had a living relative.
Mhm.
And so he brought him to his table and said, "You will always eat at my table."
Mhm.
And of course, and I can never say his name right.
Yeah.
Because I want to say Melchizedek, but that's
No,
not it.
yeah.
So Melchizedek's a whole different guy, but
Yeah, I
he
know.
was lame in both feet. So
Right,
he
yeah.
he
They all had
definitely
club
had a
feet, so did
disability.
Jonathan. Yeah.
And sorry, I would always let Star say the name. I'm like, Star,
Yeah,
I'm gonna
I
mess up
know.
that name.
Yeah, I'm not even gonna try it.
But she could say it. But so Stars, we became good friends through all this, and she's just an amazing lady, and such an awesome writer, and just able to see the whole like just see the whole layout for this book and what we had to do. So as somebody wrote their story, then at the end we would say what you can do. So we had this section that was what you can do. So in my case, one time I was at the kids were really young and Matthew had a walker, and this walker went around the side and then around the back. So instead of like you see an older person who would have a walker that they push in front of them, he pulled it alongside, walked in the middle of it.
Mhm.
And so he we were at someone's house and they had all this property and they had Easter egg hunts set up. So we were there, and he was probably 4, um maybe 5, but he wasn't very old. And he was all excited, just so excited for this Easter egg hunt. And he starts kicking and holding up his legs and he's getting ready, and then they said go. Well, he got stuck in the grass. He couldn't move
Oh,
those wheels and he was stuck
oh.
and he was behind everybody, but he was still trying. He was kept moving, and along came a dad who I call the story the Marine and the Easter egg hunt, because he had been a Marine and he saw Matthew, and he ran over and he picked up Matthew in one arm, picked up his walker in the other, and just ran with him and took him and helped him find all the little eggs that he had. And
Oh, no.
and so it's such a sweet thing because I never forgot it. So I wrote about it and put it in this book that was one of my 4 stories. And so but at the end I just said, be a hero to a child. You know, you don't have to, go and feel like you have to provide for that child, or, like give a monetary amount of money to the parents or go and take them a meal. Just be a hero to a child who's struggling, and if you see that they can't get over something or around something, or just pick them up and move them, help them. And so each story had a little bit of what you can do to help. And we wanted people to know our stories, because we wanted people to know not just our struggles, but also, the 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 humanity of these children and their awesome relationship with the Lord. Because somebody asked me, because my husband had a hard time dealing with Matthew's disabilities, and he and our pastor at that time said, even to this day at 26, Matthew is a very soft-hearted guy, and he's very intelligent, he's very well spoken, but he's also very sensitive, and he loves the Lord. And but they said, but people noticed that even when he was a child. And they said, and the pastor just said, if it meant that when the Lord healed him, Matthew's personality changed, would you want it? And we just said, no, no. So, and it changed our whole family. Even his twin, she is in overseas, and the thing that drew her there was the orphanages and the way that they treated their disabled. And she's just like, because it's a communist country, and it was so hard.
Where is she now?
She's in she's in Vietnam, but it was hard for her to see how the disabled people were treated and how the orphans were treated. And she just came home and broke down. So it made her very sensitive to people with disabilities and people who, children, especially. And children just love my daughter. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where she is. They're drawn to her. And so I think having her brother the way he was, it made her very sensitive. And so, it was just the book. I mean, as we were writing it, and as we were asking people to endorse it, we were just getting comments like, this is such a much needed book for people to understand, those who love a disabled or special needs child. So,
and how many contributors did you have altogether?
We had about 35 or 36.
Wow.
Yeah. So they could write up to 3 stories, and we made sure their stories were about 500 words. We didn't want them too long. We wanted them to be very easy reads. And then at the end, we put kind of a lighthearted thing where we said, if a special needs person ruled the world, and how the world would look, and there were things like, when Matthew was in therapy, he had physical and occupational therapy, and the moms and I and our children had like this connection because we all had the same kinds of challenges. But our children were never asked to birthday parties. They were never asked to do things like that most children are invited to. So when it was Matthew and Alexandria's like 7th birthday, we have 4 acres, and it was pretty much my husband had cleared a lot of it, because when we bought it, it had a lot of trees and overgrown, and so there were portions of it that were just totally clear, and just some grass growing, if that. But we took them to a woman I knew who had horses. So we invited all the special needs children that we were in therapy with. Oh. And we had this huge birthday party for them. And their moms came, their dads came, and their siblings could come, but it was for them. So we had the horseback riding, and this woman was very used to horseback riding. She was used they were her horses, but what I mean is she had special needs children on her horses and had participated in that kind of a therapy. So Matthew's physical and occupational therapy came to the birthday party. They walked beside the kids on while they rode these horses, and then we took them back just to play and have, you know, fun at our house and just be part of somebody's birthday party, you
Wow.
know? And
How
it was,
wonderful. Wow.
yeah, but it was hard seeing that, you know, and Matthew himself, I mean, he wasn't invited to everybody's birthday party. And um you know, so it's hard, and people don't realize that these kids just want to be treated like they're normal. They just
Mm,
want to be, even though they're not normal in social standards, or they might have problems in whether they're nonverbal, whether they have disabilities, or they're blind, or whatever, you know, or
mm,
Down syndrome. I mean, they want friends. They want to be treated like everybody else.
mm.
And that's what we wanted this book to show. That's what
Wow.
we were trying to just say, look, these are children, and sometimes these children, they don't just have special needs, they have special hearts, and
Yeah.
they have special abilities
Yeah. Now,
that
how long did you homeschool him?
Matthew I homeschooled until well, he was home most of his through high school. But there were a couple years actually when the Lord had me, when he introduced me to writing. And he basically, I felt very strongly that I was to put the kids back into this private school that we had once gone to. But at this time now, Matthew wasn't in casts. He was able to get around better. He wasn't using a walker. I mean, he was could use the elevator very easily and that kind of thing. But he was there for 2 years. So I was able to actually just sit down and start writing during those couple years that he was at this private school. And so they loved it. My youngest was there for about 3 years. They started in 3rd grade. Matthew started in 5th grade. So then he came back home for 7th grade, and I homeschooled him the rest of the till graduation. So, and then he went away to college, or went to college locally.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, so he was home for most of his school
Well,
age
mhm.
time. So,
So you put all of these contributions together.
yes.
I assume you did that because
Well,
you're good at
Star and I
doing
did it together.
that. Yeah.
So we kind of divided up the list. So I had some coming to me, she had some coming to her. Then we would edit and, you know, just correct anything we saw that might have needed correcting. Um, and then formatted them. And then my publisher that had published my Bible study, Jewels of Hebrews, um, were excited about publishing this. So they took it on and published it and reformatted it. And so that's always like we had it like, oh, let's format it like this, let's do this, and do, you know, and then they come and they're like, we need a clean copy that has no formatting. And it's like, oh.
Uh,
But that's just,
yeah.
you know, that's the
So when
nature of the
when was it
business.
published? When was it released?
I want to say, yeah, I'm certain it was November of 2021.
Mhm.
So um yeah,
And
so yeah, because it's been
and
a year.
you recently had this recognized in a very powerful way with
Yeah,
an award
so
or two awards. One award or two awards? Two
2.
awards? Yeah.
Mhm.
Tell
So
us
there's a
about
big
that.
conference that happens in North Carolina. It's called um, Blue Ridge Mountains Christian Writers Conference. Sorry, it's a pretty big title, and it takes place every year in at the end of May until the beginning of June. And I couldn't go this year, unfortunately, but it was funny because Star went, and so we entered our book into the Sela Awards, which is for all published books for the previous year.
Hmm.
So And then we entered it into what's called the Director's Choice Award, which the directors of the conference choose the winners of this particular award. And so for Sela, it was an anthology because we had so many people contribute to it. And then in the other, it was considered more of a devotional gift book type of thing. So there's different genres, and it fit in a couple different genres. So we had so in our genre for anthology, for the Sela, we won first place, and for the Directors Award in devotions and gift books, we won first place.
Wow.
So it was pretty
Congratulations. That's awesome.
exciting. Very, very exciting.
Awesome. So you generally go to this conference every year, though, right? As I recall.
I do. I tried to go. This past year we had some things going on, and I just kind of felt like it wasn't the year to go. And
So you won the awards and you weren't there.
yeah.
Wow.
So I've had, with my podcast and with my Lauren Cruz and I have the show on Messianic Lamb Network as well. I felt like the Lord, I haven't written anything for a while, and so I felt like there were all these other things that the Lord was leading me into, and it was just hard to sit down and write. But I'm going to be teaching for Basora this fall, so that'll be fun to get back into that. I'm going to be teaching on covenant, and covenant is such an interesting topic, but it's so much deeper than we realize that we're taught in maybe church. We're not necessarily always taught all the things about covenant, or we hear just about the Messianic covenant, or but there's so much more to it, and so I was really excited.
Yes, it's so, there's so much depth to it that when you start talking about covenants, and I'm when I see what you do with it, because I'm sure it'll be awesome, but people in churches usually just kind of like glaze over and go,
"Oh yeah, I know."
There's an old covenant and a new covenant. I mean, that's pretty straightforward.
Yeah,
Well,
and it's so amazing though, even with the garden in Eden. Actually, we always hear the Garden of Eden, but it was actually really known technically as a garden in Eden, and Eden was a bigger place than just its garden. And but it was just amazing if you look out through scripture, if you study scripture to the point where you start seeing the traces of Eden everywhere, and how God is constantly wanting to take us back there. The temple, Solomon's temple, was decorated with animals and fruits and plants and trees, and it was made to look inside like you were walking into the Garden of Eden. And I don't think we often understand those kinds of things. Eden was where we were supposed to be, and Eden is where we will be in the new heavens and new earth, because God brings it back. And this is going to be like a journey, of covenant, but through Eden as well. It's just the most interesting thing that I learned recently. And even within just, it's like so many with my podcast and learning from different people I've had on. I've been learning so much lately, and it's just very interesting. I can't even, I don't want to give it all away, but it's just so cool. The things I've been learning, but I'm excited.
Yeah, awesome.
So
now back to Room at the Table. Tell everybody how they can
sure.
get a copy.
So Mount Zion Ridge Press is my publisher, and so if you go to mountzionridgepress.com, you can purchase it on their site. It's also on Amazon. My website is basically StephaniePavlantos.com, and so it's on my website. So there's lots of places, but Amazon's probably the easiest place. It's just a small paperback book that is an easy read. You can, it's just, I hope I mean, some of the people who endorsed it said, they laughed and they cried through it.
Mhm.
It was just amazing. The stories that you know, the people and their stories. I love to read people's stories. I mean, I've always enjoyed um getting a good story. I guess that's why the Lord had me write, but I just love reading people's stories. Um a woman wrote about her daughter. She gets up in the morning and she's gone.
Mhm.
She's autistic, nonverbal, and she had a history of running, going out. If she could get out, she was gone.
Mhm.
And just that whole fiasco, and trying to find her daughter, and having to call the police in the middle of the night, whatever, find her daughter, and stuff like that was happening. And then just how the Lord intervened and protected that child. And
Mhm.
in more cases, there's just so many stories out there that
Yeah,
you just don't realize, when you have a child with special needs, the challenges you're going to have with
yeah.
that child. But also, but it's not a life of challenges all the time. It's also, there's a whole other side of it, of seeing the gifts that the Lord has given them, and the purity of their heart. And it's just amazing. I think the stories that people shared in this book um were truly amazing. So
And what did Matthew think of the book?
he it's funny, because that's a good question, because when he wrote the foreword, he goes, "Well, I need some stories to know, to understand what I'm writing this forward about."
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And he read my stories about him, and he was like, "I didn't know these things. I didn't know."
Wow. Yeah.
So yeah, so he did a great job.
That must have been an unusual experience for him
Mhm.
to read it.
Yeah, yeah, to see, or to read what I had written, and the difficulties that I had,
Mhm.
and not in a horrible negative way or anything, but just to see that, wow, this was challenging for my mom.
Yeah. I think it's
So,
really cool that it won these 2 awards and
yeah, yeah.
makes
It
it.
was very,
Yeah.
yeah, it was very thrilling. It was surprising. Because it's the if the way the contests are run, you submit 2 copies of your book, and to each contest, because it goes through a reading. It's just, whoever, somebody will volunteer within the group. Yeah, I'll read that book, or I'll read that book. One person may only want to read fiction. One person may only want to read nonfiction. And so, it's broken down into finalist, and then you find out where you placed on awards night. So when we made it to the finalists for both contests, it was pretty amazing. I mean, we were like, wow. But you can get to the finals, and then there's 5 or 6 books in your category, and you might not place, or you might place third. So you still don't know. It's not so both, basically, you have 2 judges for your book, for the first round and then the finalist round, and they both have to score you high to win. So
Mhm.
that's what's pretty amazing, I guess,
Wow.
because
Wow.
when I put my Bible study in, the first person, I made it into the finalists. The first person just adored my book. But the second person didn't give me as high marks as the first person. So, because,
Yeah.
again, Bible studies are very subjective. You either like
Yeah.
deep ones, or you like, something different. So,
Yeah.
um,
Well,
so yeah, so
I wanna talk about that a little bit too, because I started the program talking about love of the book of Hebrews is one thing that we have in common.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to talk about the Room at the Table book mainly
Mm-hmm.
in this. So this was really awesome. And um, I'll have to get a copy because I have to confess I haven't read it.
Oh, it's
But
okay.
but tell us about the book of tell us about Jewels of Hebrews. I mean,
Well, I
just
do have a copy of that I can
we
show
have a
you.
little bit of time left, so
Okay. Jewels of Hebrews was basically it's on the book of Hebrews. And the first time I won't say the first time, but when the Lord kind of led me, it was 2016, and I was kind of just like going through scripture, and I was like, okay, Lord, what do you want me to read? And he would give me like the Psalms, and then we went through the Psalms, and then we went through the Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, and because I was really praying for wisdom and praying, and he's like, you want wisdom, here's where I write about it, here's where it's written about. And well, then I finished reading all that, and I felt like I'm, again, my question was like, what do you want me to read now? And it was late summer, and he's like, Hebrews, and I'm like, oh, what Hebrews, really? That's like a pretty complicated book. And so I'm like, can we read something else? And no. And so it was just like Hebrews, and so I started reading, and the first 4 verses, it was like the Holy Spirit just said, just like lit them up for me. And I
yeah,
was just like, oh my goodness, I think
yeah.
I'm gonna like this. I think I'm gonna like this. And so the more that I read, I'm a researcher by nature, so I felt like I had to start just researching. And so the first chapter is, so being called the Jewels of Hebrews. Each chapter is assigned a jewel that goes with the theme of the chapter. And what was really funny is I had written 6 chapters of the book of the Bible study before I had the title of Jewels of Hebrews. So then I had to go back and assign a jewel. And each one, it was very clear what the jewel was to be, because I like the first one is amethyst. Well, it's talking about that, he is the king. He's the son, he's the heir. He's not just a man, he's not just an angel. He is the son of God, and he is a king. And so I knew that I had to the color purple with the amethyst means royalty, kingship and majesty. So in each chapter, when I give the amethyst the stone, then I give what that purple color means biblically, what it means. And so it's just like I went through, like, each chapter. And then I like, even when I got to like chapter 12, it's the pink diamond. And it was like, it means joy. Well, what's in chapter 12? He went with joy. He went to the cross. He faced the cross,
Yeah.
So it's just all that kind of stuff was coming. And so I was just, it was like it's all Old Testament in the book of Hebrews.
Yes, yes, yes.
So I was just very excited, but so you have to be willing to go through the Old Testament when you read Hebrews, and there was just so much to learn.
Yeah, as we've talked about so many times,
Mm-hmm.
people's knowledge of the Tanakh, the Old Testament, is
Yeah.
generally very poor.
Yeah. Yeah.
I will, and I'm sure you've experienced this, where I used to have a group of, periodically have a group of pastors that come Friday night.
Mm-hmm.
And one group from a very well-known church in the area, whose name I won't mention, came like every week for a couple of years.
Mm.
And we would talk afterwards, and they would say, we never learned this. We never learned this. And I would think to myself, well, how can that be?
Yeah.
How can that be? Because the Torah is the foundation, and the prophets built on that, and New Covenant's built on that, and Yeshua said everything points to him.
And I've even heard it explained, like, you can't understand Revelation if you don't understand the Torah.
Exactly. I
And
mean,
you can't, if
Revelation
you don't
is, well, you
understand.
know better than I do, is 60 some percent Old
Yeah,
Testament
yeah,
um, direct quotes or
right.
imagery or the same kind of metaphor. I mean, it's
Mm,
2/3 of it is really the
yeah,
Old Testament.
it
But
is. And even if you can't understand the whole Bible if you don't understand the first 10 or 11 chapters of Genesis,
yeah,
because it's the
exactly.
foundation for the rest of the Bible.
That's right.
And so what do? We tend to just read
Yeah, yeah,
stories,
yeah.
We
Yes,
read the
yeah,
stories, but
yeah.
we don't understand the stories and their meaning for us. So,
I
I mean,
usually hold up. I don't even have a Bible here, but I usually hold up a Bible in most of my teachings, and I say,
I have this one.
Yeah, I say that. Yeah, I say two people took one bite of an apple that they weren't supposed to do. They rebelled. They took one bite of an apple, and everything in this book came as a result of that.
Yes.
Our situation came as a result of that,
Mhm.
and
Yep.
Messiah came as a result of that.
That's right.
And it's just so powerful to, like I've told you, you know, when I was a new believer, I was reading Torah and it was hard to understand. And
Mhm.
you read again and you read a different commentary and you read again. And all of a sudden you start to say, wow, this sounds like Yeshua. Wow, this is about Yeshua. Wow, this is a prefigurement of Yeshua.
Mhm.
And so when I put together my 33-part Torah study, and which I've done in many, many places, and I made a YouTube channel so that, you know, people wouldn't ask me to come to Willoughby to, you know, do it for two people, or, you know, not
Yes.
that I mind doing it, but it's a YouTube channel that you can watch at your leisure, just simply called The Torah Class. After I do that with each group I've ever started, we do the book of Hebrews next.
Mm,
And that group you came to is
right.
exactly why we're doing Hebrews, because they went through the Torah class. We took a little
Okay.
break and then we started into Hebrews because it ties everything together.
Right, it does. And that is where I just fell in love with the book of Exodus,
Yeah. Yeah.
and and even, of course, in Hebrews it's not just about the Messiah, because it's mainly about the Messiah,
Mhm.
obviously, but it also talks about Moses and Abraham
Sure. Yes.
and Melchizedek. And so when you understand that we are in the order of, because Jesus is in the order of Melchizedek, we are in the order of Melchizedek
Yeah.
as priests in his
Amen.
kingdom,
Yes.
because the Levitical priesthood
Yes.
is no longer.
Yes.
And so there's just so much to understand.
And in
And
chapter 7, you know, when he the whole chapter about Melchizedek,
yes.
and it's so cool when you think of the how the writer explains it,
Hmm.
whether it's Paul or not Paul, I don't know. I don't think it's Paul. I don't know what you think. And
I don't think it's Paul.
no, I don't think it's Paul. And I always joke that when we're in heaven, if Paul says, I actually wrote the book of Hebrews, I'm going to say, well, that's awesome. And if somebody who I don't know comes up to me and says, I actually wrote the book of Hebrews, I'm going to say, that's awesome.
Yeah.
It's
I loved
whoever
your
wrote
book.
it.
I loved
But
your book.
I love
Right.
the way he describes that
Yeah.
whole interaction of Melchizedek and Abraham. You know, the
Mhm.
greater blessing, the lesser, and
Yes.
Abraham tithes to him, and Melchizedek gives him bread and wine, and
Yes.
he has no
Union.
father, no mother, no genealogy. I mean, it's just so
I
amazing.
know. It
It's so
is.
amazing.
I have another book. I didn't write this, but have you heard of Chad Bird?
Yes. Uh-huh.
So
Yeah.
he writes this book, and we're going to be doing it on Living Waters. So it's the show that Lauren Cruz and I do
Oh,
on
uh-huh.
Messianic Lamb Network, to give her a little selfless plug there. But
Yeah.
we're going to be going through the Christ key, because in this he goes through the whole Old Testament and shows you everywhere Jesus is,
Oh, wow.
and it's amazing.
When is that?
He was
When is
in
that
Cleveland.
series starting?
What's that?
When is that series starting on
It's
Lamb?
this Tuesday. So
Oh,
what is that? It is the 20th?
okay, great.
Yeah, Tuesday, June 20th. We're going to start, and you don't have to have the book, but if you want to get the book, you can follow along with us. We're not,
Mhm.
of course, reading it. We're just talking about the main things that he talked about. But yeah, so when he was in Cleveland, he spoke on that.
Wow.
And so I knew that I had to get that book and
And your
teach it.
program is on Tuesdays at 11 a.m.
That's correct. Eastern
And then
Standard
it's when
Time.
is it rebroadcast? I can never remember.
I think on Wednesdays and Fridays, he actually told me they added another day.
Oh, great.
So, but definitely Friday at 5, I believe, but
Mhm.
I could be wrong on that time, but it rebroadcast. And then it's on my YouTube channel as well. So,
Mhm. Yes.
so you
Yeah.
can watch it anytime there.
Yeah, it's easier to watch then 'cause
So just put in my name and you'll find my YouTube
yeah,
channel.
that's awesome. No,
Yeah.
your show's great.
Thank you.
I watch it many times. It's really good. It's good to have, I have to say this, and I don't mean to criticize people, but before I retired, I told everybody, "Wow, when I retire, I can watch Christian TV all day."
Mhm.
Well, I can watch Christian TV for about 20 minutes
Yes.
because the programs are really kind of fluffy and
Yeah.
like, you do like real teaching, and people need to hear real teaching.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
not just,
Lauren and I are both just teachers
oh
and like
yeah,
you, I
yeah,
mean, I think you're a natural teacher, gifted, God gifted teacher and when God gives you that gift, I mean, everything becomes you just want to tell everything that the Lord teaches you, you want to teach. That's all you can do.
yes,
When he makes you a teacher, he just
yeah,
says, "Okay, so what you learn, you turn around and
yes,
share with
yes.
everybody else."
Yeah.
So,
And in the book of James where he writes, if you're going to be a teacher,
mhm,
you have to be careful because you're
right.
held to a higher. And that is so true. This is why, it's so important to teach the foundations of things, the basis of things. And
It is.
there can be different interpretations of things, but if you go off on some wild tangent teaching something, you influence a lot of people in a wrong direction.
Right. Oh, I know. And I mean, I know that you feel the same way because it's just like I pray every day. It's like, Lord, don't let me be deceived and don't let me deceive
Yes.
somebody else. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like I mean, I really do pray. Just don't let me be deceived because there's so
Yeah.
many teachings out there
Yes.
and there's so much corruption and I don't want to be
Yes.
part of it.
Yeah,
So
amen. Well, we're out of time. In fact,
we
we're
are.
over time. Yeah, we're over time. We don't want our boss, Mark Davis,
Yes.
to be mad at us. Well, Stephanie, this has been awesome.
Well,
Thanks
thank
so
you.
much
I've
for
enjoyed
coming on.
talking with you.
And let's do it again sometime in a few
Ooh,
months.
yeah. I've had you on my show, so we can do that again too, because
Oh,
that's,
that'd be fun. Yeah, that was
yeah,
fun.
it's always fun.
Yes. So we'll see you soon.
Okay, thank you. Thank
Bye.
you.